afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Richard Morco, and this is a very special edition of the Long Hill Report. We are pleased to have an independent candidate for the 1st Congressional District, Nadia Milleron, who is running for the seat now held by Richie Neal. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
She has quite a history. I've heard some of it now, but she was well known recently. If you remember the crashes of the MAX 737 Boeing, I remember it because I had been on one before that flew across the Atlantic, landed safely, and then I heard of a couple of crashes. I said, whoa, what is going on here? Well, I think Nadia could speak to that a little better than I. It was a tragedy in her life, as well as for many other people.
Yeah, in March 10th of 2019, my daughter boarded an airplane in Washington, D.C. Actually, MAX planes don't go usually a long distance. They don't usually go across the Atlantic, but they go shorter distances. And so she boarded another kind of plane in Washington and flew to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia for a job where she was going to look at accountability for the Gates Foundation. How was their money being used in Uganda for healthcare? Was it really helping the people that it was intended to help? So she was all about data and accountability and making the quality of life, especially through healthcare, better for each human being. So in Addis, the capital of Ethiopia, she changed planes and she texted us that she would be in Nairobi in 2 hours. And I was up, so that was 8:30 in the morning in Ethiopia, and then for us it was 1:30 in the morning, and we had a family member that was sick in the house, and so I was up and I was washing sheets and I turned on the BBC News. And then at 1:45, the BBC said that a MAX plane had crashed 6 minutes and 40 seconds after takeoff, that it was meant to take off at 8:36 in the morning from Ethiopia and was headed to Nairobi, and it was Ethiopian Airlines. So I just started shaking in the laundry room because airlines don't have 2 planes going to the same place and leaving at the same time. And she had told us that she boarded the plane. So I gathered my family and we got in the car and we headed to JFK Airport, and we didn't know if there were any survivors until we got to Qatar, and that was a 12-hour flight. And when we got to Qatar, we learned that there were no survivors on the plane. And then we went to Ethiopia to try to collect Samia's remains. And we were quite confused, like, why did this happen? We heard this was the second plane. I am Ralph Nader's niece. People were saying, oh, Ralph Nader called this plane out. He said it was dangerous. Isn't it ironic that his niece was on the plane? She actually had dinner with him the night before she died. And so the press was trying to talk to us about this, and I didn't want to talk to them. And I just wanted to try to deal with the misery of having lost my beautiful, warm, positive daughter who never had a bad word to say about people, and she was a happy warrior. So 6 feet tall, always wore 4-inch heels, really just proud of herself and happy with herself in the world. So she went to UMass and made the absolute most of every minute in her life and spoke several languages and traveled all around the world. She already had her master's degree from the University of Copenhagen. So I was just trying to kind of cope with her funeral and her loss, and it got to April, and I refused to do anything public. And my uncle said, you know, Nadia, they're going to put the plane back in the air. And then he showed me that the FAA had reduced the comment period for reintroduction of the plane to service from 30 days to 15 days. And I remember that moment when I realized that the comment period had been reduced like that. That was when it hit me, because before that I was like, oh no, Boeing would never allow this plane to fly again unfixed, because they've already had, this is a second crash. They they would fix it before going up in the air. The FAA would make sure that they fixed it. Of course, people are not going to risk a third crash. When I saw they actually were proceeding toward a third crash, that's when I felt that I had to scrape myself off the couch and go to Washington. And so we did go there. We did work very hard. Us and other crash families went to over 300 offices on Capitol Hill. We helped with hearings. We helped with writing legislation. We supported the efforts going on in Congress. And then in December of 2020, they passed the Aviation Safety and Accountability Act, which was passed unanimously and therefore bipartisan. And I was actually amazed at that. Like, while we were wandering around Capitol Hill, going from appointment to appointment, missing some appointments, crying in meetings, I didn't get the sense while we were doing that anything was actually happening. In fact, I was watching Boeing has over 100 lobbyists on Capitol Hill, and they are always smartly dressed, and they were coming out in the hearing room from areas that we weren't allowed to go in with the representatives and the senators. And so I just had this kind of defeated feeling, but I kept going just because, for my own conscience, like, I didn't want there to be a third crash, and for me to know that I did everything possible to prevent the third crash and not to have other grieving family members, have to face that. So I was kind of emboldened at that point. Oh, wow, we were able to pass this. Of course, Boeing immediately tried rolling back the provisions, but trying to get exemptions and everything. But I said to my husband, and because we struggled all of 2021 trying to get the FAA to be more vigilant and really correct Boeing's production problems that they kept having. And we were looking at all the pilot reports for this plane and seeing that there was repeated emergency landings. And so, in January of 2022, I said, I'm going to go to Illinois. I'm going to try to change the law there so that there's punitive damages for wrongful death, because the bean counters at Boeing are saying, oh, we can insure for all these deaths, so we're not actually paying out of our company. But you can't insure for punitive damages. So I thought, well, if they had to face that, if they had to face an unknown huge amount of money that they could be liable for and they couldn't insure for it, then they would correct their own production problems, and they would look more carefully at the data and what's going on with the plane. And so everybody told me, my husband, my family, and even our lawyers told me, this is impossible. You can't go as an outsider to Illinois where there's all this wheeling and dealing. You can't hope to possibly pass state legislation there. And I said, well, I'd like to try, because it's a logical thing that in Illinois you have punitive damages for wrongful injury, so it's almost like an accident of history. Why shouldn't you also have it for wrongful death? So I did pack my car with all of the pictures of the victims, and I drove to Springfield, Illinois, and I stayed in a Motel 6. I had to register as a lobbyist, and also I had to find a sponsor to this simple bill which just said, and there should just change 2 lines of the law, and there should be punitive for damages for wrongful death as well as wrongful injury. And I started working the offices just like I did before, and I stood outside of the chambers, and I felt like people were agreeing with me, but I couldn't get it out of the subcommittee where it was stuck. And Curtis Taru was the representative who was head of that subcommittee. And I was going into his district and talking with his people, his constituents, and I was hearing that they care about this. And so I went to him and I said, look, your constituents care about this. So, and he's like, no, they don't. I said, well, they have landlords that put, have wrongful death occurs in your district. Like, it's a very poor district. So they do face corporate greed. They do face corporate malfeasance. And so they do care about it. Well, he didn't believe me. So my son said, Mama, you know what a QR code is? Here's a QR code for that the constituents can immediately call his office. And here's another one that they could immediately email him. So just go around and talk to the people, and they can let their representative know immediately that they do support you. So I walked around there. It's the University of Chicago and the surrounding area. I walked around there for 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And I was just going up to people in the wind. I was trying to hold the QR codes flat so that they could. It was amazing how nice people were, because they stopped in the cold. it was March in Chicago. It was quite cold and windy. And when I came back on Tuesday, because legislators just work Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, even Washington or Chicago or wherever, they only work 3 days a week. So I got back on Tuesday and I stood out in front of the chambers, and here comes Mr. Tarver roaring up to me, and he goes, "I ought to have a restraining order issued against you." And I was like this, and it's because he received 120 opinions from his district, which said by email or by phone that they do care about this issue. But, he was mad at me for that moment. It was great because we were in the big rotunda, in a beautiful rotunda in the Capitol building in Illinois. And a lot of attention was paid to me because he was yelling at me. And so all the legislators were like, wow, what's going on? Who is she? Who is she? So he did me a huge favor in terms of educating the rest of the representatives. It also was a shame to some of the representatives that he was yelling at the bereaved mother. And so anyway, nothing happened that session, but the next session, the new president of the Illinois Trial Lawyers Association, Patrick Salvi, he took up this issue as a primary focus of the Illinois Trial Lawyers Association agenda. And they got it passed, and the governor of Illinois did sign it in August of 2023. And it was really, at that time, the biggest achievement of my life because I initiated the whole thing. I went to Illinois, I wrote the legislation, not the ultimate legislation that was passed, but I wrote the initial. I got a sponsor who was the sponsor who eventually passed the bill. So I felt empowered. So I thought, wow, okay, individuals can do a lot. And I remembered that our representative, Richard Neal, he wasn't very responsive to us. In fact, the office was the least responsive office of all the offices we went to on Capitol Hill. And we were in a couple of really dicey situations trying to deal with Boeing and crash families on Capitol Hill needing help from our representative's office. The reality is that each representative office is going to get about 30,000 calls asking for help every year. That is part of the job. That is what happens. Every representative's office have to be ready to deal with that, ready to direct people toward the resources which could help them. You can't just send an email, which is the same 2 lines email, for every single issue and every single inquiry that you get in your office. That's not responsible. That's not what you're supposed to do for your job. And that's what he does. So it's like actually the least responsive office. And I did see offices that were somewhat better than him, and then other offices that were a lot better. And so that's what I want to do. I want to change this office to have a high standard of responsiveness and attending to the real issues in our district. So it's a big monologue, sorry.
Well, it took you a while to get to the point, but you got there. That Richie Neal, I'm famous for Richie Neal. I don't know if you know what the Prime Act is.
The what?
Prime Act.
Prime Act.
It's an act to get more slaughterhouses for small farm areas. And
Is it a Massachusetts?
No,
it's
I
national.
believe it's national, federal. I contacted his office. I emailed him. Got a flowing response back about how wonderful it was to hear from his constituents, how he loved his kids. Nothing about the Prime Act, though. So, it's just, what's he doing there? So you would have to make, if you get elected, you would have to make an effort to be worse. Now, from what you've just done now, you're an energetic lady, but I think you'll not be making the effort to be worse than him. So that was very interesting that you went around, kind of took us through a labyrinth to get to your point, but you got to your point. Very important. You want to tell about your life, and then we'll get into I have some of the things you're interested in. If you want to tell about how you moved because of your son to the farm, about yourself.
Sure.
You don't have to take as much time.
Okay, I'll take a shorter time. Okay, so I was practicing law in Connecticut, and I was taking cases off the bench, and then my third child got cancer, and so then I took a break from law to help him be treated, but then 9 months later he died, and so we moved to Massachusetts to a farm, and we started farming as a family. We produced first pork, we produced livestock, so we produced pork, and then that business did not succeed, so we produced chicken. The price of organic grain doubled the fourth year of our business, so we lost a bunch of money on that. And then finally, our final livestock business was lamb production. So we did that, and then my children grew up homeschooling, they grew up farming, and then as they graduated from high school, as the youngest graduated, I got back into practicing law in Connecticut.
I know that your husband is runs an organization that promotes American manufacturing. So I know that's something you're interested in. We'll get to that too.
Okay.
All right. In fact, we'll get to it now. In your website, you have your wish to return manufacturing to the first district and lower cost of living for working families.
Right.
I would like to hear the plan.
Sure. So a healthy economy requires about 15% manufacturing. And in Massachusetts, we have 10% manufacturing. In our district, we have even less, so I'm guesstimating around 7%. Richard Neal has voted for China to have most favored nation status 20 times. He also has voted for China to be part of the World Trade Organization. The result of that was not that China became a capitalist country like ours with our system, which I think was maybe the intent. The result of it was that China started producing consumer goods in such huge quantities at such low prices that it wiped out huge swaths of American manufacturing, including in our district. Yeah. Wow. So sending many, many jobs abroad, thousands.
How to get it back?
How to get it back is to have trade barriers so that our American companies have an incentive to produce the item here. So if you have a tariff on something you produce in China, and then you have the ability to produce it here, then you have the incentive. And so you want to avoid the trade barrier, and the American company would produce it here. So for example, with generic pharmaceuticals, maybe there are good regulatory laws in India and China, but they don't enforce them. So we don't have generic pharmaceuticals in our house, not because we want to support big pharma, but because there are adulterated compounds in the generic painkillers that you would take. And so that injures a person who's already ill by hurting their liver. And so we need, for many reasons, for our economy, for our security, for our medical security, to produce not only generic pharmaceuticals, but other goods, other products which support our health care in the hospital. We need to produce them here. And we learned that during COVID, but did we learn it? We're not doing it. So
would you say in like our district, because I'm part of it, but Pittsfield was famous for General Electric years ago.
I have a little bit of hearing loss, so you have to speak up a little bit.
Pittsfield was famous for General Electric years
Yes.
ago.
Yes.
The goods they do, would you tariff competitors that compete with, say, General Electric?
Right, General Electric would need to produce their goods here, giving them financial incentives. And there's no daylight between the Biden administration's Trade Ambassador Catherine Tai and the Trump's administration's Trade Ambassador Robert Lighthizer. There's no daylight between them. They agree on tariffs and trade barriers. So that they agree on that to promote American manufacturing. So I'm not sure about the Harris administration, because Barack Obama had an opposite idea. So he wanted international production and promoting the well-being of Wall Street instead of regular people in the United States. So each administration has their problems. Trump, was terrible on aviation safety. the Biden administration is not great on aviation safety, but better than Trump. Then Trump maybe would be better on trade initiatives. So I think us as citizens, we have to hold the feet to the fire of any elected official, and they're not going to be just taking care of us. We have to hold them to account. So one thing with General Electric is that they polluted the Houstonic River, and they put like PCBs in the river. And so there's been a dredging and a cleanup of that. And 4 years ago, Richard Neal had the opinion that that sludge should go for processing and it should be stored somewhere else. But now he has the idea, $50,000 in donations later from General Electric, that sludge should be placed in a residential area next to the Houstonic River that it was taken out of and next to a state park. This is material which is carcinogenic. My son died of cancer and from an environmental cause. So I think that is a pay for play. General Electric is saving millions of dollars by paying off these legislators to agree with him, because they would have to transport the material to New York State, to a processing facility, and then transport it to be stored properly. So they don't want to do that. So instead, they just save a lot of money by paying Richard Neal $50,000 and other legislators too, and then they get to put it right in a residential area in Lee. So it's just an example. Richard Neal gets a lot of money from the pharmaceutical corporations, and he was the only member of the mass delegation on December 11th of this past year, 2023, to vote against transparency in pharmaceutical pricing. So funny how that works, right? So again, pay for play. So he's been in a long time. He gets a lot of money.
You weren't born in the state, were you?
Pardon?
You weren't born in the state, were you?
No.
Well, those of us from the Boston area, you say Richie Neal did something like that. We say, wicked shocker. No, I completely see where you're going with that.
But, a lot of people actually are shocked. And I voted for Richie Neal many times because he presents himself differently to the district. So, for example, people who are municipal employees and have a pension, if they paid into Social Security before, they don't get any of that Social Security. So Richie Neal told the police retirement union in Springfield, yes, I'm going to solve this problem so that you guys are not just getting your meager municipal pension, you're also getting the Social Security you paid into in other jobs. And then he hasn't done anything about it. Now he has a bill, so he'll always say that he has a bill. But interesting to note, there are no co-sponsors to his bill. There are also no survivor benefits in his bill. 325 members of the House just last week went around Richie Neal and around the Ways and Means Committee and had a petition to bring their bill, H.R. 82, directly to the floor of the House. Now that bill allows for people to get their Social Security benefits who have a municipal pension, and also to have survivor benefits. I don't know what his argument is, that it's too expensive. He's interested in paying for foreign wars and sending billions of dollars abroad. So if he would just stop doing that, then would be plenty of money to pay for poor people's survivor benefits.
Why doesn't he agree with the other bill? Does he say?
He didn't. I don't know what he has said about it. He could say that it's too expensive. He could say that it wouldn't pass, but how could he say that? Look, 325 members of the House, now it's all the way up to 375 are co-sponsors of that bill. So it's going to pass. So I think he's on the wrong side of a lot of issues. And the reason he is because of his funding from the financial services industry, the pharmaceutical industry, General Electric. He has the most corporate funding of any member of the House. That's quite a distinction from a Democratic district.
I've lived in this state all my life, just about. It doesn't shock me.
Yeah, but I think you have more knowledge than a lot of people. When I say these things about Richie Neal, people are surprised. They are not educated about what he's doing. We made some funny radio ads for the campaign, but they're also intended to be educational. We want people to know that firefighters, police officers, teachers who have municipal pensions are not being served by Richie Neal. Those people don't know that.
I guess fair enough. Now they do, at least in Charlton.
We hope so, as long as they hear about the campaign. It's very difficult for me to reach 500,000 people.
I would not disagree. Now you also want to bring more doctors to the community and make health care affordable. How can you do that?
Okay, so we have a shortage of doctors, so we pay for insurance. We're mandated to pay for insurance, but we can't get appointments because each practice is so overloaded. If you have elderly parents who move into this district, they cannot get a doctor at all because all the practices are full. So if you have a condition that you need your doctor to see and you have to wait for 4 months, 6 months, maybe you even have to wait a year, that means that you're not covered medically, even though you're paying. So it doesn't actually have to do at this point with affordability. It has to do with enough personnel. So there is a bill in Congress, it's in the House and the Senate, to increase the number of medical doctors in our country. Richard Neal has not signed on to that bill, even though the Ways and Means Committee, the subject matter is healthcare, among other subjects. But yeah, so it's under his jurisdiction.
I'm going to pivot now to foreign policy. I bore the audience here. I bore because I tell them I'm chairman, chief executive officer, and only member of the Neutralist Association of the U.S. So I would love to hear Nadia foreign policy.
We can't afford the expenditures that we are making on foreign wars. So our district, the people in our district are struggling so much, they're under so much trauma that they can't really focus on what is going on internationally. But what they do know is that we don't have infrastructure. We don't have healthcare coverage. Our physical infrastructure is crumbling. In fact, look at the flooding that's going on right now. So this past week, FEMA, the emergency agency for the United States that's dealing with the flooding, said that they were $9 billion short. They didn't have $9 billion to cover the emergency. But the same month, we sent $8.5 billion abroad for other people's wars. So it just doesn't make any sense. We can't afford it. Not only is it immoral to participate in killing innocent human beings, let's leave that to the side for the moment, but we simply don't have the money to, and we are not in a condition to be able to send that kind of money abroad.
So you would withdraw from the Middle East, I assume?
We shouldn't send any more weapons and aid to anybody because we can't afford it.
And that in Europe, we should leave NATO.
Right. We should not be the exclusive funder of NATO because
Why
other
should we
people.
be in NATO at all?
Yeah, I can't answer your question. All I know is we can't afford it.
I will take that as we got a bug out. Asia, should we be in Asia? We have
Militarily?
Yes.
We shouldn't be anywhere militarily.
Well, okay, very good. You got my complete endorsement there. We should.
We need defense, but we shouldn't have any aggression.
There was I repeat this to everybody, there was a long-serving French ambassador to the United States in the early part of the 20th century, and he said about the United States, on the east, there's fish. On the west, there's fish. To the north, a weak neighbor. To the south, a weak neighbor. There's no reason for them to be anything but neutral. And that's why I'm the neutralist. And basically, you've agreed. You might not, okay, maybe we've got to be in NATO a little, but basically I think I've got your agreement, and you've got my vote on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, let's see what we got. Anything? Oh, growing our own food here again.
So in our district, we produce more food than any other district in Massachusetts. We also have more food insecurity among our population than any other district in Massachusetts. More people on SNAP benefits. So it's a distribution problem. So, for example, on our farm, we produce hay and corn for the biggest dairy in Massachusetts, 1,700 cows at Pine Island Farm. And we had, because of the campaign, we had the Somali community come over to our farm to check it out, and they are placed as refugees in Springfield, but they're actually farmers, and they actually want to produce their own food. So they came there and they looked at all this corn, and they're like, wow, that's incredible. You feed that to cows? We use that corn. We eat that corn. So they harvested. I mean, for us, it was just like they were a bunch of raccoons. I mean, it didn't bother us at all. They could take as much as they want. It was negligible in terms of all the silage that we produce. We use the whole corn plant for cow feed. And so for them to take some ears and fill up a couple of garbage bags, it wasn't really significant for us. And so they were happy, and they did that, and they want to produce their own food. And it's kind of beautiful because they're stuck in areas which are food deserts in Springfield, and they still have the desire for fresh food. So, and they have the know-how to know how to produce it. And so I think they can be leaders in the communities where people's bodies have changed so that they're only interested in food from the convenience store because their body doesn't know how to process fresh food anymore. But immigrants can be leaders to show others how they can eat more healthy again and even produce their own food.
Not taking away from the validity of that. I think that's a great idea. But is it going to stop the food desert situation or the
it
food
shows you that because we produce so much food in our district and there is this huge need. So what the problem is distribution. So the small thing that I did by bringing this community and giving them access to our farm can be done on a larger scale. For example, this year there was a ton of rain and also hot sun. And we just produced an incredible number of vegetables in Berkshire County. And so, that we had excess. We had an absolute excess. And then there's other people that don't have any fresh food. So we just have to connect those two. And yes, it can make a big difference.
I mean, you're still going to get my vote. But does that take a congressperson? Would you be better from that aspect of being the missionary or the evangelist for that in the district yourself?
Sure, it is, and it doesn't necessarily take a congressperson to do that, but because I'm a farmer, it's something that I'm fundamentally interested in. And all of my issues I'm going to pursue regardless. Like, if I win this election, I'll pursue it as a representative. If I won the election, I have to run again in 2 years anyway. If I don't win the election, I'm still going to pursue all these issues.
Right. I wrote, and I think I sent it to Holly. I may not have, an article that about corn. Well, actually, it was a review. I didn't send it because it was in the local newspaper about a fellow named Rid Shin who writes about, he founded the American, I guess it's called the Livestock Trust now. It was the American Minor Breeds Conservancy to conserve older breeds. And he's big in raising cattle, the idea of raising it in this country. And in doing that review, I found an article that I put in that Montana has more cattle than people, yet it imports cattle to eat. I can understand if you were talking about Rhode Island, but the land where they have, what was that show? The guy, the actor, the famous actor who's in the show, he has a big farm. Why are we importing? And it also got into about corn. We subsidize corn more than anything else. And there you are growing it. You getting a subsidy?
No.
This is well over, subsidized.
But I actually want to push back a little bit on how I could affect food security as a representative, because in the last 2 years have been the first 2 years in the history of our country that we are importing more food than we are producing. And that is a crazy reality for our country.
I know about that. Yes,
yeah, and so I would definitely address that as a representative.
Well, time flies, and we are at the end, and it's been very, very interesting, and I'm very grateful to you for coming. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Richard Morco, and special edition of the Long Hill Report, and we've been graced with Nadia Milleron, running for Congress as an independent in the 1st District.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.